Kimberly, you can take roll, please.
President Bill Dismatt.
Here.
Vice President Carrie Nicholson.
Here.
Secretary Lisa Middleton.
Here.
Treasurer Larry Williams.
Here.
Trustee Brent Dawson.
Here.
Trustee Shawna Gamble.
Here.
Trustee Richard Lindsay.
Here.
Okay, we will observe our customary moment of silence. Larry, can you lead us in the pledge, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, may I entertain a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Support.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Members of the audience may address the board on agenda items only. Big crowd tonight, so we'll move on to board topics. A, strategic communication plan objectives.
Yes, so in the last board meeting, I left these for you to review. Let me tell you how I arrived at these things. I took a stab at information that needs to be out there based on strategic objectives that are in front of us. And I'll go through those each one at a time. But on the back also I included a list of, according to our SWOT analysis, the opportunities and threats that were identified, strengths and weaknesses, capturing those from the minutes that we had. Did y'all have a chance to read those, I hope? Okay. So, the first objective was sharing the facts behind the annexation of Albion. That's a story that continues to need to be told, that needs to be told transparently and upfront with all the facts that we can provide. So providing the facts behind the decisions on annexation, the funding through 22G for annexation, the general operational fund and sinking fund dollars spent by MPS on operations at Albion, and the financial stability of MPS because of the annexation. Those things need to get out there so that people understand, yes, it wasn't a windfall for the district, and yet it helped the district in a lot of ways. Number one was an increase or to stabilize our enrollment process along the way, and also to bring revenues in, which we then spend out of revenues to provide services. But along the way, we were able to continue our good stewardship financially with what Becky and I have been doing since 2012. When did you come?
Been here for 5.5 years.
Wow, okay. The other part of that is to help, and you saw some of that, but I think having good conversation around that, both at the any committee meetings we have, any public forums we have to have good talking points behind this. So we need to fashion what that looks like so that all of you have that in front of you. So when you see your constituents, you talk about that, you can present that information with fidelity and you understand it. And we need to help you get those talking points and help you get that background. I didn't go through about who the target audience is or the purpose, desired actions and target dates. We can do that as we go through that. We need to first get the content behind it and talk through it. And you know, if you don't agree with something that should be on there as a talking point, let us know that. And we'll either let you know that these are the facts that need to be there. Maybe it's like, maybe we need to couch it differently, or we need to frame it differently for people to understand it. And sometimes I talk right over some people's perspectives, and I want to make sure that we don't do that.
It just, Brooks that wrote the article in the Inquirer, so when annexation happened, he was a sophomore in college. This is all new to him. So part of what I watched over the weekend is Derek Allen said, well, why did he mention Starcom? And he Frank said, why didn't he mention out in college? But there was so much involved in it, and it's now, there was another reporter, I think, that the advisor had, that was commenting on things, and she just, people don't have frame of context when we look through it, and
yes.
So it still feels very close and familiar to us. But I think it would be helpful to have kind of, if we're gonna do a 30 second, we do 30 minutes, we do 30 seconds explaining what happened. That would be a helpful thing.
Yep.
You guys just gotta keep saying it over and over.
Because actually, all those comments were made along the way, but this young man was a little bit
Yeah.
overwhelmed. And,
Yeah.
and I said, I don't know where you want to go with this, but there's a lot of things
How many
behind the
pages do
story.
you wanna
Right.
cover, right? So,
So if we had that captured in the objective one and you have that in front of you, that'll be a good reference for you. And we'll be all on the same page with that. The second objective was share the enrollment trend for MPS since annexation. So I said provide enrollment numbers for 2015, February and October count. You guys realize we have 2 counts in the calendar year. But one falls in February of the previous school year, and one falls in October of the new school year. And between the 2 of those, that's how we come up with our per pupil foundation count on FTE. But look in 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 to demonstrate impact since annexation and provide 10-year projection enrollment for 2021 to 2031. Talk about potential capacity. Now those are real loose numbers on projection. Obviously a lot can change. You know, if we get a huge influx of folks moving in because we have a huge factory that opens up and those types of things, all that can happen. Or God forbid if we lost one hospital, that could have a real significant effect on the organization. So there's a lot of things, as an example, not that that's true. There's a lot of things that could go on.
you say that out loud. Yeah.
I know, I'm sorry. but-
Something besides.
Okay,
Progressive dynamics, how about that?
there you go, progressive dynamics. Any one of those factories or any one of those organizations or businesses in town. So what we need to do is to be able to look at that and say, you know, here's the degree of estimate that we're looking at for as we go along. We can break down the numbers to say, here's our incoming kindergarten enrollment across the board from each of our 4 elementaries, because we need to see how are our elementaries maintaining that along the way. So K through 5, those kids are staying, more kids are coming in, or more kids are leaving. We need to know that, because that's the foundation piece behind what's going to happen then in the middle school and into the high school.
Is there, in regards to enrollment, I know a lot of our elementary schools are tight in space. Is there any caps that we have on those numbers that would, I mean, are we limited with the facilities we currently have at a certain number?
Yes and no. If we were maxed at all, we have a contracted number of students that could be in each class. It's a range.
Mhm.
Offhand, it's like, what is it, 20 to 26. I'll bring those to you. So that you look at every classroom and how many classrooms we have. You can tell how in Walters we are a little more flexible. We have 1 extra teacher out of the kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades. And that 1 extra teacher sometimes teaches in 3rd grade, sometimes, you know, not the same teacher, but,
Right.
and we move that based on the population.
Mhm.
Everybody else has 2 teachers per grade level. Harrington has 2 teachers per grade level, and sometimes their class sizes are small, below the minimum of the range that we expect. But we've committed to making sure that we at least have 2 teachers per grade level at every building. Financially, that is a little bit of a hardship at times, but it's also what we do. And then on top of that, through additional funding through title, we've added team teachers, 2 certified teachers in at least each of the kindergarten classrooms, trying to maintain that perspective in the 1st grade as well at Harrington.
Mhm.
And that's for title dollars that are funded.
And I'm just thinking, you know, further ahead, like with objective 4, you know, facility needs assessment, that kind of number can come in. If we're capped at, you know, this many elementary students, we, you know, it's a good point to use for, you know, talking points for, you know, expansion or
Yes.
new facilities or needs of buildings, so.
And we can paint that picture, Becky, right?
Yes.
Because people want to know, you know, what's the impact of that. Larry brought up, you know, you get out of the kindergarten level and the grade school level, you get to the middle school. How many of those students from the 5th grade are actually coming to our middle school? How many students are we school choicing out of our district, and how many are school choicing in? where are those school of choice kids coming from? Where are they going to? So we can add that to the picture so that you get complete view of that. And then when we get to the high school and the opportunity high school, we need to know how are those kids completing successfully? And what is our completion rate? We need to update the figures that I presented to you in 2017-18, so we can represent the end of 18, the end of 19. So that needs to be updated and changed. But that's part of what we have to talk about in regards to population and school of choice as well. And Larry asked, of those kids that are coming, that were living and residing in Albion, going to the old Albion school or going to Marshall and then choiced out, and then they had come back into our district, how well are they doing? And I think that's a really good comment to make actually to any child that does that, because we have kids in Marshall that do the same thing. So we want to make sure that we're looking at all of that aspect of school of choice. Okay?
Can you capture that last piece?
Yes, it takes a lot of work on Kimberly's part, because,
No problem.
is that a sigh?
Yes.
Out of my ear, I hear this sigh. You know, it's good that I have my hearing aids in because I pick up everything. Yeah, because the state does not disaggregate students based on their address. Right, so we have to go back through, and Kimberly's got to pick that child, run them through, and follow them all the way along. So when we talk about who our dropouts are, like the 13% dropout of students from Albion since our cooperative high school on, we can identify that because those kids have left our system and never showed up in any other system. We haven't had a request for records. They aren't in the CEPI system showing that they're attending another school. And that's another record that we have to check on. It doesn't mean that they didn't move out of state and went and just didn't ask for more records or did something different, but we're gonna accept them as a dropout anyways because we can't verify. So that's the level of integrity that we talk about in regards to our data. And when like Ron French called from Bridge Magazine about the Benton Harbor situation, I said, here's the rest of the story that you can't get off of my school data, because you can't disaggregate that information easily. It takes a lot of work on my secretary's part to get heavily involved in that, and it takes time. But we can present that under Objective 2. Under Objective 3 is share the staffing trend for MPS since annexation. Part of it is because we have a teacher shortage in the state of Michigan that some folks and some politicians may deny, but that's the reality of it. We have less students enrolling in schools of education across our universities in the state of Michigan. It's not just Michigan, it's across the nation, but we know that there's an issue there. And when you take a look at that issue and then you compound that with dynamics that we experience within our district, it's part of what the committee's been talking about, is we know there's equity differences between our teaching and learning environments in which our teachers operate, which our kids receive learning. And when we have that, how do teachers then feel about their longevity and their investment? And is that one of those impacts? I had one of the members on the work group ask that direct question. Does the teaching and learning environment matter to teachers staying in the field and staying with us as a district? Well, yeah, it does. Does it matter for kids? Yes, it does, absolutely. So we want to talk about, are there, have we originally, when we did the annexation and opened up Harrington, and Carrie was very, very strong at pointing this out all the time, was we were losing teachers. Well, we knew that, and we were bringing teachers in. Sometimes at odd hours or odd times of the school year, which doesn't speak well sometimes to be able to bring somebody in and hold on to them, because some folks may be just transitioning in just to get a stronghold and then move on quickly. So we have to stabilize that, and we've been stabilizing that. It's not absolutely perfect, and there's good reasons why some folks are leaving and some folks are staying, but it's better than it was. But what about the other schools? Are we having the same issues? And what about our retirement rate, our expectation teachers that are gonna be retiring soon. You know, we kind of look at that, based on longevity, and you can kind of see how many, what's our expected turnover or attrition. We need to take a look at that and start to anticipate that as we move forward as well.
Have we had any, teachers come out of the collaboration with Elgin College?
We did have one, and she left. There are 6 or 7 more that are in that. And we need to make, if we have positions available for them that they're certified to, we offer that position. Otherwise, they take their certification and go and find another job elsewhere. So far, that hasn't been the case. We had 2 actually. One didn't make it through the process when we were working with her. The other one did, came and worked for us, and she had to leave. And she had to leave because of other issues, personal issues. Not performance, but other personal issues. You saw in the article about one of our graduates that we're very fond of and proud of, and he is concerned that there's not a teaching position for him in Marshall, although that's what he's always wanted to do. So, you know, we have to face that. We have to figure that out. I hate to lose him, but I understand the circumstance. So there's things that we have to look at as far as transition. We want, and we also want to look at, as I was talking to Shauna individually, Shauna, you don't mind me bringing it up, we were talking about having professionals in front of kids that are diverse. All kids need to see diverse professionals in front of them teaching. That's what we do, and we have to figure out a way to do that better, and we have to figure out how to be more intentional about recruiting. So that needs to be in this piece as well. You know, like what's the makeup of our staffing model, and how does that work? The fourth,
Randy,
yeah.
Does the city income tax, how will that be addressed in terms of retention? Does that have an effect on teachers in the city of Albion?
Well, it was a flashpoint of concern the second year we were operating over in Albion with Harrington. When you take a look at the overall cost of that or the impact on that, it was doable. I mean, my wife got caught up in that because she worked over there, and so we looked at that. It was doable. Probably more doable for us than others, but it was doable. I think it does have an impact. I mean, a lot of folks don't like to work in the city that collects city income tax.
What is the city income tax? Is it just in Albion?
Well, there's one in Battle Creek.
Okay.
There's one in
Well,
Battle Creek.
Lexington used to have
Yeah.
taxes though.
There's one up in Lansing, the city of Lansing. Jackson. So when you work inside a city that has that, even a small city like Albion, that does have an impact. People kind of, maybe I should go elsewhere. But that's a good question. I think the proportion is not huge, but it's there.
Marshall could pass an income tax, that's all.
Pardon me?
Marshall could pass an income tax, that's all.
I can't believe you said that out loud. Did you really say that out loud?
Maybe not, maybe people would not wanna work in Marshall.
Could be a way to tax the hospital, right? That's a
Okay.
whole other issue.
Whole nother issue, but it's a good point. So maybe when we're talking about the staffing trends, we also talk about certain dynamics that exist within our district that, you know, the nuts and bolts behind equity in the teaching and learning environments in which our teachers operate, the issues about city tax and now being a not in Marshall, although one could argue that taxes in Marshall are huge for a lot of different reasons. Partly is what we're exacting on the taxpayers, but there's a whole lot of other things that are stacked on there as well. So we can look at that taxing structure as well.
So if we were to look at that, like, would we be able to consider something like, I don't know what the right term would be,
But like, you know how if someone works second shift, they get a shift increase? Would it be possible for us to consider, if you are a teacher working in Albion, you get a little bit more to cover that difference?
Yeah.
So that your salary's stable compared to what somebody that's working in Marshall would get paid.
Okay, so, yeah, the short answer is yes. Long answer is don't know. Short answer being yes is we already gave stipends for every teacher that worked over in Harrington. Actually, we did that for,
There's a lot of moving parts to that statement.
right,
There's a lot of different contracts that are over in there. There's a lot of different employee groups that work there. So it's not just like a teacher union, there's also other unions, and there's a lot of moving parts.
could we approach that? Sure, we could do that in our negotiations and things and considerations, but in this objective that we're gonna be communicating out to, I think what we need to do is say what is, as opposed to what can we do.
Okay.
Before we get into those conversations. This will help identify some of those heavy lift areas that we should focus on. But I think for the purposes of the strategic objectives, it's what is. So we can say, those that work in Albion are taxed by city tax, and here's the tax burden that Albion carries for their taxpayers, and here's the tax burden that Marshall carries.
What is the Albion income tax? Is it a percentage?
Yes, it's 0.5% if you work there but don't live there, and 1% if you live there. So
Okay.
it's not very high, and I don't know when property values are much lower in Albion, so in the long run, I don't know if I end up paying less taxes by working in Albion and living in Albion than if I worked in Albion and lived in Marshall. No.
I don't think we can go down that path, now that I'm thinking about it on the property tax stuff, because home values come into play, property taxes come into play, those kind of things, and whether teachers choose to live in Albion or in that surrounding area, or Marshall in our surrounding area. I don't think we can go down that path and try to find any kind of equitable conversation about that. I think the city tax is a direct impact on teacher A teaching here and teacher B teaching here, so we can speak to that, or anything else that might impact on that.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna say that we haven't already explored that as a district. We did with the district's attorney. I mean, the conversation has come up, when the Albion tax came up. So we have had conversations with our district attorney and with the teachers union on it. So, it's not something that they brought to the table in negotiations either, that it was deemed. If you're making about $60,000 and you don't live in the city of Albion, you're paying about $250 a year for the tax working there. That's really ballpark figures. I just pulled someone and kind of threw a little number together just so you're aware of what they're kind of looking at. So that's about what it is.
Okay, so the fourth objective is facility needs assessment for all 8 school buildings. We're working on that. We have an update just to give you in the next agenda item, but we're working on that. We're going to each of the buildings on Wednesdays. Thank you for those that are attending and can find the time to do that at 5 o'clock at night. When we get done with that, we expect to get done with that by mid to late March, because we have to add on technology in there. We also have to add on athletics in there. So we have all our buildings and then those 2 add-ons. We're gonna compile that information. We're gonna then have King Scott and CSM do their work and look at some estimates and kind of do some comparisons and lists and those kind of things. Will come back to the board, and you can start working through that at the board level on your governance and your authority to make those decisions on how we want to move forward. And then when that's done and we get a picture of what that looks like, that's the kind of thing that we need to start looking at. How do we define that? How do we talk about the cost? associated with each of those major significant improvements? How do we make sure that all of our facilities are being touched and all of our operations are being touched, and it's within a reasonable amount that we can go to the voters and ask for a bond. We expect that we're gonna need to have good handle on that by the time we get into September, the beginning of the next school year, where we have it locked down, where we actually have renderings that are done by King Scott, where we have those exhibits there available not only to the board but also in community forums. We need to work up to a treasury appointment in November, December, preferably actually October, November-ish, to make sure that we have that taken care of and that they give us a sign off to go forward if we're gonna be positioning ourselves for a May 2021 bond proposal. And all of that's gonna be laid out to you guys, but you have to make the call. You have to decide as we bring the information and recommendations to you, are we ready to go forward, and is the timeline appropriate? Okay. So that's what this is about. In that, you're gonna get the wants and wishes that'll come percolating out of the conversations that we're having with our staff as well. Okay, objective number 5, student performance outcomes overall and disaggregated by socioeconomics. Provide overall student outcomes for the past 6 years as identified within the district plan, and then disaggregate data based on race, gender, and economically disadvantaged. So we're going to talk about racially diverse population. As you've seen me present before, we're going to talk about our students, our white students. We're going to be talking about male and female. And we're going to be talking about economically disadvantaged versus advantaged. And all that is the determination of free and reduced lunch, or free and reduced lunch rates. We want to be able to look at that because we also want to talk about gap. And we want to talk about whether we're, how are we going to address that and approach that. We also want to talk about overalls. So when I said about within the district plan, there are those benchmarks we talked about, or targets, reading proficiently by 3rd grade, proficient mathematics by 8th grade, we moved that to 8th grade, high school graduation rates of completion, the percent of students that go into post-secondary training education, military or work with a plan, a legitimate plan, and then just seeing how they're doing after they've been into their post-secondary, how they're progressing. So those are the key ones. We can look at that and regroup on that a little bit, but those are the major ones we want to report on. And we need to get that out there and get the news out there. I think albeit the Battle Creek Wire news report that came out was something out of the blue. They just decided to follow up because he had touched on the Bridge magazine series, the most recent one for Benton Harbor. And the reason why he contacted me to talk about that. So that was out of the blue, but we need to be much more intentional about the way we're getting that information out.
I think with the data too, there's a lot of questions about like the former Albion Public Schools students and their graduation rate, and I think there can be some misconceptions about who goes to the Opportunity High School or how much control we have or ability to follow up on the students, because I assume we do not have much information on students who decide to go to Springport or Concord and their graduation rates, and so
Yeah, no, we don't have
there's really no way we can take that whole population and then compare it to ours, because we don't have that same population anymore. But I think there's a lot of misperceptions about that, and continuing to be misperceptions about what the Opportunity High School is and how people get there and what the makeup of that is. So I think we have to be real intentional when we have data out there about this is what the graduation rates, in Marshall Pub.
So you know that those questions were asked and answered back in 2017, but we haven't put it in front and kept it in front of people to see where that's at. So we've talked about all the data of graduation encompassed every student that came in and every student that left us, regardless of where they were educated, whether it was the Opportunity or the Marshall High School. We talked about the fact that we could even find out whether kids that left and came back in and whether they were successful. But we can't talk about whether kids left and then ended up being successful after they went to whichever school district they went to. That's probably left up for somebody else to do actually a research project on if they wanted to. But that's the data that we're available to, and we can do that. What's interesting is, and I was just talking with Richard about it, you have this data, you need to have it in front of people, and then you need to continually update it and keep it in front of people, or else people will forget that you've had these dialogues. Somebody asked, well, did that represent the Opportunity High School as well? Yes, it did. In fact, one of the persons asking that question back in the day was familiar with that, was part of that community forum that I presented that information to. So
She was on the board back in the day, was asking
yeah,
questions, so she.
back in the day. So, but keeping that in front of people is really important because we tend to forget about it. And then those that are new to it ask the same questions that had come up before, and we need to be aware of that. That's what's going to happen. People come in, interject themselves, move into the district, wake up and want to smell the coffee about what went on or what have you, and they have new questions that are the same old questions that were there, but they're new to them, and we have to find a way to make sure that we stay current on that information.
One of the things I was observing over the weekend was just people not knowing what the Opportunity High School is, and so we had it, when the year came in 2010, 2011.
Pardon me?
The actual Opportunity High School instead of the alternative. I mean, the alternative high school is where you sent
Yeah, 2010.
women who were pregnant and kids
Yep.
that were in trouble, right?
That's right.
And that's not what it is anymore.
No.
The woman talking about when Marshall used to send their bad kids to Harbor Creek, I remember, but nobody here back in the 90s. And I mean, St. Phil was where they got sent. That was nice. But she's a reporter now, and she's asking questions about why we're doing this and what this is and how this all works. It's all new to her. So
Right.
yeah, just have to keep looking for it.
You just got to keep it up. So having a strategic objective on communication about this is really critical. Then figuring out how do we maintain it is, in all of these areas, will be really important.
I like too that we're not just defining success of our students as those that are going on to college, but whether they're going into a skilled trade or another program, that it's not just the success of I'm going to a community college or a four-year institution, and I think that's important that we're opening up that and looking at all the different pathways that students can go to.
And those multiple pathways are really resonating with a lot of folks in our region, and we're going to need to do more and more of that. I'm so excited about where we're headed with that. So then objective 6 is district capital improvement bond. Provide a detailed analysis of the projected improvements being requested, total dollar amounts in the bond for perspective 2021, the village impact this has for taxpayers across the district, and the long-range plan for debt equalization. Debt equalization is going to happen. It's going to happen naturally, or it's going to be happening by vote, right? So yes, it was a challenging situation. After 3 years, the question should be and needs to be asked, and that's what we did, right? So we got direction from the board that we don't want to go there with a vote at this juncture. We want to make sure that we're looking at what's important for our district and improvements. We're going to go there. At some point, there will be everybody on the same page. It might take us till 2039 to get there, or it might be earlier. It all just depends on what the board decides to do and what decisions we want to make to bring to the voters for those discussions. At this juncture, we need to see a long-range plan. If we say that we're going to go to the voters every 10 to 12 years for a bond improvement, and we have to, when you look at the age of our buildings, that includes Hughes, it includes Gordon, it includes this building, how are we going to do that? And if we say that that's an expectation, how do we publicize that? So our taxpayers and voters understand it. Okay.
And this again, as we were discussing, is one of those things that we just keep creating expectation that this is how buildings are funded, and we need to do this every 10 years. And so don't think it's like the roads. I paid for roads 20 years ago, why don't I have good roads? Well, because you gotta keep maintaining as you go along, well,
Yeah.
same thing. But that's not, I don't think that's ever been part of the discussion in Marshall. I don't ever remember there being a schedule or.
This is maybe a little off topic, but is there any way to do a permanent? I mean, a lot of communities are starting to go that route. I mean, if it's gonna be every 10 years, you're really just creating a permanent millage. I mean, that just keeps coming up and fluctuating a little bit. I don't know if there's anything.
Yeah, I mean, the sinking fund is one way to do that. That's on a 10-year cycle. I don't think you can do anything because it's new needs, right? So you have to.
Yeah, there's not much time.
Analyze it every so many years.
Yeah. Just the expectation, I buy a new car every X number of years. I do work on my house every X number of years.
The closest you can get to it is you can say this chunk of dollars is what we need, because you don't go to the voters for a millage rate. You go to the voters with a set amount of dollars that you need to be able to bring in. The millage rate gets calculated. But if you went and said, this chunk of dollars is what we need projected over the next 15 to 20 years, and we're gonna draw down and sell our bonds accordingly and spacing out over that period of time to be able to accomplish that, that would be a huge bite for the voters to take and taxpayers to agree to. That's a risky proposition. Another proposition is to go for a specific, a lesser amount and a specific amount for a period of time and talk about during the process, guys, we're gonna have to come back to you again in 12 years or 10 years to talk about this again, because this is what happens, as Richard said, this is what happens with facilities. We will invest in that, but it will only extend our life on those shelf life on those facilities only so long. And then we're gonna have to make changes, so.
I remember sitting in a board of commissioners meeting and had one of the commissioners say, when they built the Justice Center in 1983, they started setting aside money for a roof, right? That's, there's no discussion, right? I mean, you come up 30 years later and you have to replace it. They should have been setting aside money in 1993 to be able to do that, and or to have a mechanism. This is a mechanism to be able to do that. We know the next year this is going to reach the end of its expected life, and we're going to have to invest money in the facility.
But it's amazing that in many people's minds, when I came here, it was talking about our newer high school, and it was our new high school. It's 50 years old, folks. It's 50 years old. And our new elementary, it's 18 years old. Yeah. So
I think it was helpful to have those dates up in front of the people, just to say we have taken good care of our facilities.
Yes, we have.
They're in good condition with the age.
The final objective is in my view, the ongoing and bigger objective is speaking more closely to what you guys have talked about to me and before about a communication plan that's regular, that's routine, that's embedded, that covers everything. We have an agreement with Bluefish, and they're supporting us along the way of what we can provide to them, and they can only report what we provide to them. Then I go to them to the next level and the next level, and I know that our building principals and our teachers are doing all the good work, and they're so busy doing the good work they can't report on what they're doing. And so we need to take and you've suggested that I consider bringing somebody into the organization that can manage some of this. Well, we do know that Ryan can do so much, and he can only be as effective as the people that are giving him the information. So we need to have somebody that's dedicated to that resource. And we're trying to figure out the right thing that we can afford to do. And I think we have a bit of a plan. I look at the model that Oaklawn did with Bluefish, and the model was Bluefish will help us with good presentation and so forth on a monthly basis, supported by individual employees within the organization. And Becky and I, as much as Becky wants to do it, we can't do it. We're gonna need to have somebody in a position to be able to feed information routinely. Every day that person's out engaging with every one of our buildings and finding good stories. Because I gotta tell you, our teachers are wonderful, and they are really awkward at sounding their horn or celebrating successes. You have to pull it out of them, because that's not what they do. not naturally. So we have to figure out, how do we get that? How do we discover and uncover good things that are going on in the district that normally would just be, oh yeah, we did that last week, that was pretty cool. To be able to put that information out so people are aware of it, and then to be proactive, so that everything that we have planned in the future, every audience, strategic audience that needs to know about that, knows about it. And we don't just rely and assume that everybody's getting it. We need to make sure that it's in front of people. That is the big, in my view, that's the backbone of the presentations in strategic objectives we have to have. And that needs to be systemic, and it needs to be embedded in our organization. And that's what you asked me to do in the last year, and that's what we're working on, but I think we need to move on it. It's time to move on it.
Who does the athletics posts?
The Go Marshall Red Hawks.
Yes, because I mean, you get updates every sport it comes across, and so I'm just thinking along those lines. Somebody's doing something for sports, but you're right. We were talking about, there's way more to our schools than just sports, and we need all the good news. I mean, we get so many stories in those leadership reports that nobody else ever sees,
Right.
and that's just touching even a small amount of the things that are really going on. That's not even getting a lot of the stories that are out there in the individual stories and groups and stuff. But I know that's constantly putting stuff out. I didn't know if we knew who was involved with that, but it's
Athletics does, like Dan does.
is it Dan
some
that
of
does?
those,
Okay.
But he also has, cause like I'm one of those parents for baseball. So I will actually get information from the coach and then put that into a short article, and then I'll upload it to the website. And I know he has people for other sports, basketball, volleyball, wrestling, you name it, that will do the same thing, and then he does some himself as well.
So you're looking for a central person that has people that bring. Did they go to a lot of people though to get that information?
But athletics has it going on. I mean, you just had to go to the event on Saturday night and see all the people that came out to support athletics.
The support is huge.
It was great. So that's going on, and then there's a natural thing that goes on with that. There's outcomes that a team does that has to be reported out publicly.
Right.
And the coaches are responsible for reporting that stuff out publicly. And then Dan looks at, with the coaches, what needs to go out there publicly that speaks to the individual athlete, whether or not the team is academic, all-state, or different things like that, and that goes out. That's a natural thing that happens in athletics that does not happen in instruction,
right.
Extracurricular and co-curricular. We have to find a way to sell that. We have to find a way to make sure that everything that we do in arts and so forth is in front, and not just a report by the superintendent that we got superior ratings in all of our things last week. So we need
People
to
want to read that, I'd rather see pictures of their kids, right?
Yes.
It applies to more than just sports.
Yes, it does.
Well, and I think that, when we first started using Bluefish, we were having the leadership reports that you guys get sent out to Bluefish. But once they do their leadership reports, it's been a couple weeks or 3 weeks since those events have passed. And so one thing that Dr. Davis and I have explored, even while we're in transition of what we're going to do, is have the principals some of the principals report directly to Bluefish on a weekly basis, what's kind of going on in their building and what's been happening. So if we're trying to get more real-time stuff right now while we're kind of in transition, and so I am gonna meet with Bluefish weekly for 15 minutes to try to make sure that we're trying to put our arms around the stuff outside of athletics, because he'll share the athletic stuff on our Facebook page, and there is other stuff that gets shared, but we just want to make sure that everything for every building is getting shared, so that we aren't just focusing on Walters or Harrington or the middle school, that everybody's got equal stuff kind of being shared out there. So that's something that we're looking at trying to do now.
Are the administrators getting any sort of training or just feedback on the types of stuff that they want? Because this is kind of new. This is kind of a marketing type thing.
That's what we're looking at right now. So that's what the administrators are saying. If you tell me what we're looking for, then we can do a Google a Google sheet that we update
Mhm.
that he has access to, so we're all, so
Mhm.
we're looking through that right now.
Okay.
That's a new thing that just within the past week or so that we've started to kind of try to wrap our arms around it.
Yeah, because I think, you know, Saturday night was great for athletics, but there's a lot of other programs in our districts that have great support. You know, the band has great support, and, you know, some of our other clubs and, you know, the performing arts program, you know, has a great support system. So there's a lot of good committees, a lot of good groups out there, and I think everybody would like to see them highlighted at some point in time, because everybody works hard, puts in the time, the commitment, the dedication. And it's just nice to see everybody get that recognition.
Part of this is having that conversation with them, asking, and you're exactly right, with mental experiences at Oakmont, you have a nurse that volunteered for homeless kids and all this crazy stuff, wonderful things. So this is this thing I did.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, that's a big community impact piece, and I can think of, we can all think
Tons
of
of
many,
stuff.
many things that
Yeah.
have done like that. But they just do it because it's what they do, but we need to report on it too. Talk about it.
So next steps is, I've talked with, central office, and we've talked about divvying this up and bringing some initial blushes of information towards you. So we wanna do that in the next board session, be able to show you some of the data that we're collecting, some of the reporting under each of these areas, and start brainstorming with you a little bit further about how we can expand this information and get this a little bit more locked down. By the time we get to April, we need to be like hitting cylinders here and having this information out there. And then adding to it as we go. Are we missing anything on these? Do you understand the logic that we did going through this?
I like this, I think this is well done. This is all gonna lead into getting the bonds passed in 2021. It's just all positive communication.
Okay, well, we'll bring that back to you then.
Any questions? Okay, let's move to B, facility needs assessment update.
Becky, you wanna take a stab at that?
Sure. So, as you're all aware, we've been doing Wednesday night meetings at different facilities within the district so that, the community and, people that are attending the meetings can take a tour of the building. And then we have, sent a survey out to the staff members of the building, to get staff input on what the needs are to improve the teaching and learning environment. Both internally and externally. So we've asked what are the 5 needs internally and what are the 5 needs externally. So we put that out, and then we are compiling all the data before we actually go to the physical building, and then we have a teacher representative from that building on the night that everyone's there to speak to the needs that they see within the building. I think that we've had really good process through that. People have been answering the survey, people have been putting their needs out there. You know, we've done Harrington and Hughes and Walters. This week we're doing Gordon and Shamrock, and then we have a schedule to follow. And tentatively we have dates for athletics and technology to follow up with those as well.
And we've talked about Dan and athletics to talk to his coaches and have them fill out their survey, and also to talk with the Boosters Club and then have somebody representing with him in that process. Taryn is probably gonna get, there's been a lot of recommendations already from the teachers through their own building relative to technology. And then Taryn's got some ideas that he wants to bring forward, so I think that's gonna be fairly focused.
He does, and I think he's done a nice job of putting it in his board reports, the needs that are there, when you look at technology. So, but yeah, the teachers have done, or the staff, I should say, have done a really nice job of voicing their needs. And I actually think it's kind of a neat thing that we're doing, that it gives everyone the voice to say, where they do have a need, so.
Well, I think it's probably the most appropriate because they're in the classroom, they're in the building every day, we're not.
Yeah.
It's amazing what you can discover just by asking them what they need.
I appreciate it, I just like the fact that you can see what people really are saying that they need, because we don't, I know that Chad does stuff from curriculum standpoints and stuff like that, but we've really just never done a process like that, so I just think it's pretty eye-opening.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
And the positive unanticipated consequences, there's also comments about other things in the academic world that they're making comments on in the survey as well. So Becky's extracting that information out and then sharing directly back to the principal and the teacher leader to say this is other compiled information beyond the facilities. So we don't say, oh, you shouldn't put that on there. We just take advantage of it while they're putting it there. Here you go. This is something else.
Is there anything that's coming out that's like really pressing, like right now, like we can't wait until 2021, like it needs to be addressed now?
I sit down every, this time of year, like it's real fresh when I do budget with the administrators and we kind of talk about needs and stuff, and really, I do think that furniture is a need within the district. We have a lot of desks and stuff that we're shuffling around, but, we're kind of taking a look at that. I mean, that's the only thing that I'm like, you know, besides some facility upgrades and stuff like that.
That's,
that we do.
that's pretty consistent across the board.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Major.
Is State Farm closing any buildings soon?
Is there anything over at the Opportunity High School that
It's already
can be
cleaned.
used?
It's already been-
It's all
done?
cleaned up.
Oh, all of that's
dispersed.
gone now?
It is all
A lot of it. There's a couple rooms that still have stuff in there, but some of that's broken, some of that we wouldn't put back in use.
I mean, we weld things back together, we're, yes.
So, interesting that Dave Martin said from King Scott was, and Todd McDonald supported it, most districts right now are looking back 20 years and saying, man, we really haven't done a focused job of updating our furniture. And when you think about it, you may think about State Farm. We all were in that hunt in 2003, 2005, 2007, where we were actually going, I mean, you know, when I was over in Athens, I was driving up to State Farm, picking stuff up as much as I could, no kidding, and bringing that stuff back to our schools. Marshall was involved in it as well. A couple of our districts were doing that. I was going over to all the military bases for Computers for Learning and picking up used computer equipment to bring it back to Athens. So everybody's been doing that along the way just to fill the gap. But we haven't done a concentrated ask to the taxpayers to update ourselves to 21st century learning environments. And that's coming. So that's kind of where we're at. Last thing I want to say about this piece is, please feel free to stop in anytime to any of these meetings that we do on Wednesday night. It starts at 5 o'clock. I know Richard said it's difficult for him to make it over from work to be there, but we go for till 6:30. Normally not much after that, so if you're in the area and you're available and you're coming through, feel free to stop in and just join the group. And just hear what's being said, the conversations that are going on, the people that are there, you know, so you get a little more familiar with that stuff, okay?
I just like had a little bit of an idea of, we do have like a nice agenda that's put together with like, what the needs were or the asks on the back, so that's something possibly I could share out with you guys if you're interested
In
in
real
that.
time.
Yes,
You know, so if you guys would like to, I'll get the past ones out to you, and moving forward, I can get them out.
Just another communications piece, because that was the first time I met you, was that when you were doing a tour of the high school for the last big push, but maybe we need to do these periodically, because again, this is a huge investment of the community in these facilities. You've been busy, so I'm not saying that you should have done one before, but maybe we need to go through this again before
Yeah.
as part of the bond process, but I mean, part of it is to see the condition and see the desks that don't sit straight and the various issues.
And it's a really cool thing about the work group is that that's what they're doing now. And what we did with the core group was do that immediately just to get their viewpoint. When we get to the community forums,
That's just a open house.
that's gonna have to be, you know, we'll do it at different locations and have people kind of walk through and see what we're talking about, that kind of thing. It's gonna be a busy next,
Like I said, when I saw those labs that were original to the new high school from 1971, made it pretty easy to vote for that new
Yeah,
facility,
right.
so.
I think that's just common sense that before you, in essence, buy something, you wanna see it, test drive it, try it out, you know, see what kind of condition it's in. And if we're asking people for that, I think you kind of have to go.
And if
visit
they,
the
you can also
facility.
push it back and say if they complain, you can say, well, we had this opportunity, did you come take a look?
you know, we can post open houses at each of our facilities, that'd be good.
It's very eye-opening.
I'll just add a couple, to your point. So the first like 45 minutes to an hour, the administrators are taking a tour with everybody, and they're doing a great job really getting into the questions that the teachers have identified in different pieces. And then the last half hour is the dialogue, talking about what people have seen at different buildings and things like that. There've been a few things that have been like more immediate, like Becky's grabbing a bunch of computers in the next week or so from Walters and stuff like that. So there are different things like that that have popped up that are being looked at sooner than like waiting for the bond type of thing. So
Yeah, the reason I was asking just because if we want our staff to be able to teach, and if they don't have something that they need that's more urgent, if it's coming up in these surveys or in the walkthroughs, then maybe we need to address that sooner than later.
I mean, the need will come within the budget that comes to you in June. Cause there is more than just desks. I mean, we've got some pretty high.
I was gonna say,
needs.
Brad Shedd and Becky are working with the needs assessment that was done, and we're constantly looking at what we can move forward with anyways with the sinking fund, so that's constantly going on. It's
Yeah,
not
like the textbooks that we just did not too long ago.
Yeah.
Right,
You know,
yeah,
like
so,
that's, like,
yeah,
you have to have
like
those.
teacher laptops. I mean, that's a big one. We're piecing together laptops just to put, if our teachers break their laptop, you know, we had teachers step on our laptop and broke it, and we had to throw one together quickly. Our resources are tight, in that, so that stuff will be coming to you, in the budget, you know, in a capital outlay, request, the absolute need that we have right now.
Are there any technology grants out there that we can look at?
I don't know.
I don't know about technology grants. I could have Karen look into it.
There's other foundations though that we're going to for some of these asks.
The technology is the same as the capital, you need to have a plan because it just keeps.
And so Terrence presented that 7-year or 4-year, whatever that plan
We
was.
still have PTSD.
Yes,
Yeah, a big
yes.
number.
But
I
yes,
know it's just September.
we purchased teacher laptops since I've been here. And we're back on another cycle of having to do that. So.
anything else? Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to C, review of board and superintendent roles and responsibilities.
So I'm giving you a hard copy of the bylaws and a hard copy of some policies under, it should be under administrative section of our policy book. You'll see those. Did you see, by the way, if you've done electronically, that the policies look different now, the new system? The way they're presented to you online. The reason why I'm giving to you in hard copy is because I really encourage you, see Becky?
Hi, sorry.
She's got a sick child, she's gotta get here. I really encourage you to read in detail the bylaws and these policies relative to your authority and powers given to the board, and relative to the superintendent's role and responsibility connected to the board and connected to the organization. So I want you to go through it, pencil it up, put whatever you do to put a question mark by. If you see that we're being inconsistent, circle it or make a note that, Randy, we're being inconsistent according to what the bylaw says or what this policy says. Let's take a moment in our next professional development piece on the board to talk through this a little bit more. We've talked about it, I've gone around and met with you guys individually, most of you. Carrie's still, she and I have an appointment on Thursday. I just wanna make sure that you're familiar with it. Normally what we do when we bring new board members on, and this is for Brett and Shauna, is we usually get reacquainted through MASB with some kind of presentation on board governance and what that means, and kind of gets us regrouped and refreshed. We haven't done that. Probably need to do that sometime here this coming summer. So we want to talk about the likelihood of that coming forward so that we're all familiar with it. But right now, I'd like you to look at that. In particular, under the board policies, under board powers, I'd like you to go to the last one, 1240, evaluation of the superintendent. So a couple things have come up that have made me look at this. One of them in particular was when I was at the MASA Superintendent's State Conference. Chris Wygant, president of MASA, and I just talked to MASB, and they're aligned with the same recommendation, is that they're recommending that superintendents have their evaluations completed in the end of the current calendar year, and not where we currently have it in March. Rationale being two things. One is from January of 2020 until December of 2020, that process goes forward until we get the results of the academic performance of our students that are done in the spring, but aren't reported most likely until the fall. We do the analysis of our kids coming in the fall that actually have transitioned from that summer off, that summer slide discussion, and we can talk a little bit further about how growth is maintained or not maintained. And most importantly, when we have election, which we have in November, if somebody new comes on this board, they're going to be in a position in January to, as Brent and Shauna were, to participate in the evaluation of the superintendent when they weren't part of setting the goals and the objectives. And it's awkward. It's awkward for both of them. I talked to both of them about that. Kind of like, what do I say? What do I don't say? How do I get engaged in this process? And how can I contribute? I'd like to take this opportunity to do that now. And in the board policy in 1240, it indicates under section A, is if you're evaluated in 3 consecutive years as highly effective at the district's approval or discretion, you can skip 1 year, be considered highly effective in parentheses, and come back the following year and have it done. I'm not asking to skip necessarily, I'm asking to change the schedule now. I've been highly effective for 10 years straight in a row. So I think
That's not 3.
It's not 3. But I need to tell you too, though, that I have 3 administrators that are highly effective for 3 years that are gonna be jumping 1 year. So it's not that you don't give feedback, it's not that we don't talk about goals, it's just we don't go through that whole process of laying out evidence in front of the board.
When are you wanting to do it? I'm not quite sure on what you're saying. Like, when do you think an appropriate time to do that evaluation would be?
I would say November.
So basically, you're not gonna back up the full calendar year, you can like 9
Just
months.
push it
Yeah,
back.
right,
So
just
we'll
push
have
it.
time, cause we'll already know the teachers, writing will already be done at that time, we'll have student scores back at that time.
You'll have the end of the year stats and numbers available from the previous school year. So
Yeah.
you get to finish the school year and then
You get a
accumulate
much better
data.
view.
Yeah.
Right now is when we're supposed to be doing it now.
Right?
And right now is not the best time to be doing that.
It would be okay because we didn't have any new board members, but any year you have an election, we could possibly get, it does make it, I agree, it makes it.
Whenever you get stuck.
I mean, I even went to the training before we did it, and I still was like, even with the training, I still was like, I don't have any data. You know, it's hard for me to have, you know, a month of experience on the board, and like you said, not set the goals and be part of that.
So we've been practicing with the teachers on this because it's law, and we've been doing it. So any teachers that have highly effective 3 years in a row have been able to skip and then come back, and then they get evaluated the following year. And if they continue themselves being highly effective, then they can, 3 years from that, they can skip it again. So that's kind of where we're at. Like I said, I have 3 principal or administrators that are involved in that same thing, not all principals, central office and principals, and then myself. So I think this is a good time to just say, can we move it to the November instead of March? And we're, you know.
So the way this is written, we could do it then at the end of 2020 and then not do that until 2022, right? Do this every other year.
The way it's written.
You're just asking us to push it back within the same year.
Yeah, I don't think I wanna, basically, the way I read it is you have 3 consecutive years as highly effective, you can skip 1 year, and then you have to be evaluated the following year and then continue on that pattern. If you go back to effective or less than that, then you don't get that option, right? So in my view, I just like to change the schedule. It's really what I'm trying to accomplish here. You can continue to, I mean, we can still have a meeting to evaluate, to talk about goals for 2020 and make sure that we're on pace with that. And we can talk about some evaluation piece in closed session, that'd be fine as well, but I just don't want to bring all of that into you until we get further down the line and try to change the date.
That would be something we'd have to take as a board action.
I think so. I think you'd have to prove that.
Doing that in the next meeting or in March.
Would you guys be comfortable with that?
When are you doing the, I guess when are the teachers' evaluations done and when are the administrators' evaluations done? What time?
I'm right now in the initial stages of meeting with my charges that I do the evaluations direct for. I'm a direct evaluator for. I'm gonna get through the initial stage and then I come back in April and wrap that up so that before the end of April, we have outcomes for them to understand. Teachers are in the same way, but forgive me, but I don't have the contract, but there is a specific date that they have to have their evaluations done by. And there's a specific date we have to know whether or not any teacher's gonna go on provisional or anything like that. And I have to do the same thing with my administrators.
Okay.
And that's usually before the end of the year. By the end of the year.
And that schedule will stay the same.
Yeah, that stays the same. Because you're the ones that evaluate me, I'm the one that evaluates them, so it doesn't matter about that process.
But theirs is also part of that contract as well.
Teachers are for sure.
So I have a question about like, what would that look like if we did decide to move it back to November, considering that you've mentioned more than once that you're like 5 years and you're ready to go to the beach. So what's that gonna look like when, you know, we have a new superintendent that comes in? Do we have to reevaluate at that point if we're, you know, we have someone that starts in July 1st and we have to evaluate them already in November? Or is that something that we go back to and say, you know, when Dr. Davis does retire, we relook at how we're gonna do that?
He's not gonna do that till we're done with our term.
Every time he mentions it, it gets shorter and shorter.
My first thoughts on that is a lot of times when you're in a job, you get a 6-month review. So if we had a superintendent that started on July 1, it might make sense to do it, but more of a condensed 6-month review and then get them on schedule where they would fall each November going forward.
Like 2 6 months in there.
Yeah.
And I think it would be fair to do it that way, so the first full year will be in there next year, but they get updates about how are you doing. Because you're gonna set some expectations and goals when you're going through and hiring somebody. And what are the immediate things they need to do, and you're gonna gauge on how, you know, whatever that's gonna be. I'm not gonna put words in your mouth, but as you go through that process, you'll know what to expect and give them a checkup. They're gonna be on that time frame where, okay, you're here, you're not gonna give them a 5-year contract up front, I don't think. You'll probably make a decision about how that goes, but give them feedback in that first period of time would be good.
So we wouldn't be setting a policy to do this, we're just doing it in your specific circumstances.
No, I would strongly suggest, I mean, that's what MAST and MASA are both saying, superintendents should change their rotation to be evaluated before the end of the calendar year.
So I'll say it, as far as us getting to decide when to skip a year based on the 3 years, that's something we can do. From this point forward, it'll always be November.
There you go.
But when the new person comes in, we'll have to specifically decide what to do with that person at that point. So if they start on January 1st, we probably would do November. Or we can do 6 months. I guess
That'll be set up when that person.
I think it just.
I guess I'm thinking we've changed your evaluations a lot in the 10 years that I've been on the board. And we'll do it the way we need to do it with the new person. That's just what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
It's like a type of evaluation.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
I think we kept the timing the same the whole time.
Yeah.
This is the first time we're talking about changing the timing.
Right, so.
And we're talking about an actual policy change,
This is
specified policy change,
this
right?
is a policy in our policies.
Right, I just wanted, that's why I asked that question, because I was thinking it's not just saying, you know, this year, when we look at academic evaluation, we're gonna do it in November instead. This is like, technically speaking, moving forward, this is what we're going to do, unless and until we change that.
Yes, and I'm recommending that we do that because I wanna operate with that for the rest of the time I'm here. And then I would expect that would be carried through for whoever takes my spot, but that would be up to you guys to make that decision. I'm not asking for skipping, that's a law, that you can act, that by the district's discretion,
We can choose.
you could do that with the superintendent, but by law, I need to make that available to any of my reports that I was, and that includes the teaching staff based on contract.
Does the policy say it's supposed to be in March? Does it say?
No, so I was just looking.
I think
see,
it just says
I-
year end. I don't think it
Yeah.
says, I'm looking for a specific date in the policy, so I don't think,
Yeah, we
if there's
fund-
no required date, I mean, is there,
No.
so we don't have to make an action, we just say, yeah, let's do that, or, you know, it's kind of, as a consensus, right? Or do we
Yeah,
actually
because
have to make?
there is no March date. Now, that's our practice that we begin
Right.
in March and that you have to have it done at some point before the end of the year and we set budget. Is essentially
Right.
what we were doing, but for this, and that goes to speak also, how do we address, any kind of, increase in compensation or whatever? In my view, I'm fine with being evaluated and wait until the contract gets negotiated with the teachers and everything's set with the budget, and then that gets applied. I mean, that's usually in July, June, July, August, and that, a lot of times, retroactives back to the, beginning of the fiscal year. So that's, any compensation changes should be tied to fiscal year, not to calendar year.
Mhm.
So I'm not asking for that, I'm just asking that we do the process, at this
Well, and it
time.
makes sense to do it after the teacher negotiations
Yeah.
and all the data comes in the fall.
So we would do this in November, then it would be June of next year that you can get a pay increase. Or
That's right.
whatever.
Or decrease?
Or decrease.
Or decrease. Which will make my retirement happen a lot quicker.
We'll speed that up, Sean.
Every time he talks about it, it gets shorter and shorter.
So to say it another way, so we can, if we hired somebody on January 2nd, we could, when they walk in the door, say, we're gonna review your performance in June, but the policy would say November, so essentially we'd have 2 the first year. We could do that, or we can choose to wait a year.
At least.
At least annually.
Yeah, at least.
I don't know if we do that or not. It seems like a lot to expect in 6 months. 6 months is not long. But I support what you're asking for in these things.
So I'll work with you and Kimberly on putting together something for the next board meeting
Okay,
that we can take action on.
I appreciate your consideration for that.
Any other questions on C? Okay, we'll move on to D, disciplinary hearings.
And so, this is school discipline according to the school law. Alright? I downloaded that and went through all of what legal says that we have to do. We've got our Truant things, we've got our framework. I hate to say this, but I mean, over the last 2 months, you've been inundated with a lot of disciplinary action, and we all know the cause of a lot of that. But you also know that a couple other cases came forward that needed to be reviewed as well, independent of what transpired. So there's a couple ways we can look at this. I looked at law, and law says that, that it's your power to do disciplinary hearings brought to you by the organization as a independent and unbiased board, because you're basically hearing officers, right? It also says it could be done by committee, or it could be done by a disciplinary panel, quote unquote, represented by the board. You could decide that we just want to continue to do it as a board as a whole, and do whenever we do a disciplinary hearing is going to be away from the board session, or it's going to be before a board session. The likelihood of us having an inundation like we did recently is hopefully behind us, knock on wood, but we're not sure. I'm thinking we should consider either an ad hoc, which means that when there's a disciplinary hearing that needs to come up, there's a call out after we talk to the parent and the administration, and we schedule, here's the likely date. We put a call out and say what 4 board members want to step up and be on an ad hoc committee for this disciplinary hearing. Kind of like what we do with the reinstatement hearing, right? Because we don't have a set committee for reinstatement. We usually do that with ad hoc.
But it could be more than 4.
But it could be more.
We need
like,
at least 4,
least
but
4.
it could be all of them.
Yes.
So it's publicly noticed, you can all hear.
Yeah, publicly noticed. It becomes an open session for the student number. It becomes closed session if the family requests a closed session. We do the normal process that we do. It doesn't require every board member to be there, but at least a majority. And when we have the quorum set, the downside of that is you have to trust and support the recommendation coming out of that committee, that ad hoc or the group that did the disciplinary panel or disciplinary hearing, because you have to accept, we're not going to go back through and retry it. It's going to have to come in with open board meeting action on student number X. And then the recommendation will be read, and you'll make a determination to do that. If you're not part of the process, you're going to be accepting what your colleagues are putting forth as a recommendation. And if you do it in an ad hoc way, it does not mean that you all can't show up and be a part of that hearing.
It means any 4 or up to 7.
Up to 7.
Which is nice, because I think if you set it as a panel or committee, you're going to have 4 people in a situation like this that are bombarded with it. Because I'd said several times it would have been great to have, talking with you and Richard, it would have been great to have one, at noon on Thursday if we could get 4 people together. Or what I think I mentioned that to you, it would have been if we could have found ways to do that. So I like it as an idea.
It could offer more flexibility for the parent too.
Yes.
You could speed up their process too. If they had to wait to the board meeting, and then because there were multiple groups, they had to wait 3 board meetings to come. That's 6 weeks, not counting the time period between, when all that went down. So we're talking, you could get these processes in faster.
It
I think.
also affords those families and those students a little bit more privacy if it's not happening on a Monday night when all these other people are coming into a meeting. It's, even though it's supposed to be closed session, it's hard to maintain their privacy when, especially if we have a big board meeting with a lot of people around like we've had. And then it's just hard, you want to keep it private for them as well, especially when it's very sensitive. Like you mentioned, it's flexible, so if Monday night does not affect the night the parents work, and they don't have to take off work, most families to get here to a meeting because Monday nights don't work for them.
Two parent household or 2 people household that both work jobs and they're overlapping and so forth, but there's this day or this day that they're both available for it. That gives a lot more flexibility.
I think that's serving our district and giving them more opportunity when times that work better for them, especially if they were given a couple different days
And also
And
situations,
the late nights, it
and like-
keeps us from having to be here until 1 in the
situations where
morning.
Larry maybe personally involved or knows families personally, he knows that's when he just would sit, you know, or any of us, we, you know, I can't, that's one I'd have to be, if I'm gonna be abstaining anyway, it'd be a good one to
Right.
sit down on and save that time too.
I'm not opposed to Saturday, I mentioned that.
Look at, hindsight is wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're like, why didn't I come up with this?
Sunday
30
night
minutes ago?
could still be an option as
Right,
well,
could
if
be.
that works out well.
We just work it out first with the parent, make sure that we do the due process, everything's all set up. Kimberly makes a conversation with them, gets them identified what date we're looking at, et cetera. Then we go from there. And
And then the administrators aren't here until midnight and have to work the next day.
yeah.
Parents, families, us, and students.
Okay, so
I'm still, sorry. So there are a couple scenarios that happen where, after we do the hearing, basically the student's going back to school the next day. So those would benefit the most from staying on a Monday night. You follow what I'm saying? So sometimes the recommendation is, the student's gonna be reinstated the next day, but it still has to come in front of us. If we were to do that, and then they still have to wait another week or 2 weeks for the board meeting for it to be approved, there's benefit to just keeping that on Monday night.
okay, so my response to that off the cuff is, number one, there's a number of reasons why people have to delay before they get their hearing, because some of that has to do with the legalese behind what we're doing and some of the things that restrict us from bringing them forward past that. Secondly, if during their suspension in lieu of waiting for the board hearing, you actually have a hearing earlier, it doesn't change the reality of them being suspended until the board session necessarily. It just gives them an opportunity to have that decision made, and then you can say they can return subject to the final approval in open session of the recommendation by the committee. So you could do that as well. I mean, we can work through those kind of
Right.
issues. I never expected that we were gonna have that experience in the last year, a month and a half, but, you know, my sense of that is this is gonna be much more fluid. And we have a meeting every 2 weeks. Sometimes it's 3 or whatever, but I think we'll work it out. If it's really uncomfortable or inconvenient or not in the student's best interest, and you guys make a hearing and you guys decide this is what we're gonna do, we could actually bring them back in lieu of, or we could, you know, we'll figure out where that goes. To that end, I put a fact card in front of you. I'm still nursing this a little bit, but this is what I put together. If you look on the one side on Board of Education guidelines, the suspension is defined as 1 to 10 days approved by building administrator. If it goes 11 to 45 days, it has to be approved by the superintendent, and I have authority to do that up to 45 days.
Is that school days or calendar days?
That would be school days.
Okay.
And then 46 to 59 days, if they go longer up to the 59th day, that has to be approved by the board. And it could be actually before that, so it's not like we wait till 45 days to ask you to have a hearing. It can go anytime before that, but I put them out until a board session can be held and a disciplinary hearing can be held to determine what that's gonna be. And then you just kind of tack on and say, well, up to 59 days, that's your authority for a suspension, okay? Expulsion now, according to school law, is 60 days to 180 days, as approved by the board, only approved by the board. You have not given me, nor have you historically given the superintendent, although you can legally give me the authority to expel a student, but we function as a whole and want the board to deal with that issue, okay? So within the expulsion, you gotta remember, there are permanent expulsions and there are expulsions. And there are expulsions with conditions, and there are expulsions that can indicate they're able to come back for reinstatement or not, okay? And then the note, all students require due process, impartial disciplinary hearing, and verification of the 7 factors considered prior to determination of disciplinary action at the building administrator level and at the board of education level. And that is, I didn't put that in here, but I'm gonna cite in my next version, 380.1310D subsection 1 defines what those 7 conditions are, and that's restorative practice conditions. You guys know what those are. And then reinstatement guidelines are in 1311 subsection 6. It speaks about reinstatement, okay?
Was that restorative piece added recently?
Yes.
Okay.
That's an update, yep. The flip side is, here are the offenses. And what I indicated is, shall expel is the language in the law. Shall suspend or expel is language within the law, and may suspend or expel is language within the law. And the way they pertain is possession of a dangerous weapon in school, on grounds, or on the bus, or at a school function, and it meets all the criteria, it meets the letter of the law that says the person was in possession of a dangerous weapon with intent. They knew it, they had it, they were either trying to use it for protection or for assault. Either one, doesn't matter. All right, and they don't meet the 4 criteria as an exception to the possession of a dangerous weapon. That says that you shall expel. Doesn't mean that they can't be reinstated. It might mean that they're going to be expelled permanently, depends on the condition. Reinstatement could occur for somebody that is completely responsible for possession of a dangerous weapon for all the wrong reasons. And you might say, because of their age, you're going to be willing to let them go to the opportunity, or to the MYCA, or because of their age, you might let them go to the alternative program, as long as they're, according to school law, segregated away from the population in which they were egregiously doing their behavior. Okay? Or you may say they can't come back to our district, but you're going to allow them to be considered to go to another district if another district's willing to take them. Commits arson in school or on school grounds, that is a shall expel. Commits CSC, criminal sexual conduct in school or on school grounds, or is adjudicated on, pleads to, or found guilty of criminally sexual conduct against another pupil in the school district, that is shall expel. Commits physical assault at school against an employee, volunteer, or contractor, that is shall expel. When you get to possession of a weapon but meets one of the 4 conditions, you know what those are if you recall? Or it's not a dangerous weapon but in possession of a weapon, you can determine suspension or expulsion, but you shall suspend or expel because of that behavior. Commits CSC against another pupil in the school district. The difference between that is not in the school or on school grounds. You shall suspend or expel, and you have to make that judgment. Commits verbal assault, bomb threat, or similar threat. Believe it or not, that is shall suspend, expel, gives you the opportunity to consider the conditions and circumstances. Commits physical assault against another pupil in the school district. That is shall suspend or expel. Now we've had a lot of those lately. And you know, we define what assault means. Is intent to do harm, physical harm, to others, and that they initiate that. If they get into a fight, you have to determine, did they carry that too far, or were they just simply trying to protect themselves? Not their brother, somebody else, but themselves. And then when you get down to guilty of a gross misdemeanor or persistent disobedience, and sometimes younger kids have been brought to us by persistent disobedience in the middle school, that is may suspend and expel. So my administrators know coming in with that condition, and they make your recommendation, it is strictly up to you to make that determination on whether you feel we've done enough to stop the cycle of disobedience, that we've done restorative practice and so forth, and what you're gonna do about that. And then other continual infractions of student code of conduct based on progressive discipline. So if we've done the 1 day, the 3 day, the 5 day, the 10 day, and they come back to you because they say the person is still vaping and carrying vapes all around, and they're selling vapes to their peers, and we can't get the person to stop, we're bringing them to the board for disciplinary action. That's when you decide on what you're gonna do with that one. I thought it would be helpful, and I'll clarify this again before we do it, but I wanna make this available to you. I wanna make it available to all my building administrators so they understand, and we'll walk them through that process. But this could be something you can have on your table anytime we have an expulsion or a disciplinary hearing, and you can look at that and say, okay, this is where we're at. Helpful, not helpful, good, not good?
Helpful.
All right, this came out of a conversation on a one-on-one. I forget which one of you suggested that we get something to help us understand and navigate. I think this is probably the best thing to have a fact sheet that gives you quick reference guide to at least what your parameters are, okay?
There were a number of things we discussed, obviously, all these things, but the restorative practices, it would be nice, I think, as part of that list of, here's all the bad stuff they did, because they were all able to say, here's what we did, but it wasn't written down anywhere. I don't know if they can log those things, or just make a statement, a paragraph to say, here's what we did.
To that end, Richard, we do have a checkbox in restorative practice within the Power School.
It's in the software, okay.
Yeah. I gotta find out if there's a comment box in there, because that's where I think that's our last conversation with leadership was, you should have a comment box to indicate that you attempted or it was refused or.
It's a lot easier for us if that's been done,
Yeah.
at least for me.
Yeah, because you should know, rather than just go, yeah, we talked about that, or yeah, we did that, or whatever, you should know that there were these attempts to do it, and these were successful, these weren't. You had, last year, we had a young man that got up here and talked about, that the school didn't do anything on restorative practice. Well, we had evidence that, yeah, they did. When you had this issue, that you came in, you met with the kids that you thought were egregious towards you. There was discussion, there was agreement, they moved on, they didn't follow through. There were some of them that continued to do that. Did you then bring it back to the administration? Well, no, I didn't, because I thought, what's the use, it didn't work the first time. Well, sometimes it won't work with all kids on the first time, a restorative practice. It doesn't mean you shouldn't still tell an adult and continue to follow through to make sure that that gets accomplished. So there's things that we should give you in that regard, Richard, so you guys feel more confident that steps have been taken, offers have been made. Sometimes victims will say no. In fact, this one person said, no, I'm not gonna do it anymore. And I get it, I understand why they might do that, but we're doing everything we should be doing. You should know what that looks like, and that's part of the discussion.
So this isn't directly related, it's kind of indirectly related. At the Summit Point board meeting last Tuesday, there was a presentation about what Summit Point's doing, working with the schools. So I asked about whether or not there can be a point, I'm thinking about, there were a couple of individuals that had 30, 35 different instances where they had had interventions. And it feels like maybe 5 or 6 or 10, I don't know what the right number is, but we ought to intervene and send them to Summit Point. Maybe this is restorative, right? Because we've now said you need to do something different. You're not being successful in the school. We're not going to wait for you to kick the crap out of somebody. We're going to affirmatively send you off. Because again, if at incident number 20, we're now deciding whether or not to expel them, it makes my decision a lot easier because they had that and we tried to get them out. They didn't take advantage of it. Hopefully they took advantage of it. It turned out well.
Are you thinking it would be more prevention too? Preventative?
Well,
Before
ideally,
it gets
and
to
this is judges doing positive things as opposed to sending people to prison. Our analogy There were like maybe 2 of the students that we had that had like a really long list, and you kind of wonder, well, did somebody?
When you say we, you're talking about Summit Point.
No, I'm thinking about we the board, but when do you as administration call Summit Point, so we've got this child? I think back to the kid we had a couple years ago that we just sort of missed. He had some issues. I think he was a good kid, got headed in the wrong direction. When I sat on his, a lot of them come back to school.
Reinstatement?
Reinstatement hearing. But he just sort of had the feeling, I think probably Greg People would say, we kind of missed him and we should have paid attention in a different way. Is there a way to recognize that? Is there a way to, I don't know.
Well,
Gene gave me the look like I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, and then so that I don't know either. I mean, they're working on something like that with Battle Creek Public to try to recognize people and send them in the right direction at the right time, as opposed to expelling them from school.
Yeah,
I don't think that's right.
yeah, okay, so it goes back to our tier 1, 2, and tier 3 behaviors. We have protocols in place with Summit Point and Star Commonwealth that if the student has, it could be a egregious and very traumatic episode.
One instance,
One is,
social,
right, yeah. Or it could be a sequence of things, and we know that they're starting to get up there into that tier 2 and tier 3. Tier 3 means we have to have intervention. Tier 2 can be, work with the teacher a little bit, bring them out in the hallway, do this, do that. Tier 1 is the teacher's responsibility in the classroom to manage those kind of issues that are disruptive. Tier 3 is when we make the referral, and we're referring these kids to Summit Point as a gatekeeper who goes through that process and then assigns them to STAR or assigns them to one of their therapists, and they start working if they're found eligible. And the eligibility has nothing to do with finance, it has everything to do with the student's need. And once we get those reports, we can tell you, so when we come in and we're looking at expulsion, we can say, this person was referred to so-and-so, and
To be able to have that in front of me
yes,
at least would be make a huge difference.
right, and participated, exactly, right, yep, good point.
So to make the change that we're talking about, for the disciplinary hearings, is that something we have to take action on?
I don't think so, this is just practice for us, I think we
So
can,
it's just changing.
yeah, we could just do it, see how it works, pilot it with, lo and behold, the next person that comes in front of us. I think it's legit, I mean, I think it's more user-friendly, more service-oriented towards the parents and the kid.
I think pilot's a great word. I mean, you
guys.
can try it and see how it works.
Well,
for
would they
all
have
of
the
us.
option to say no, they want the whole board, or is it, this is when we're making, I mean, that's something I
No,
haven't thought about.
they don't have that option anyways, you could
Okay.
not show up.
Yeah, on any given Monday night.
Yeah,
that
so
would only be
that's not their
one.
option. Their
Okay.
option is they get in front of an unbiased disciplinary panel, and that's you. I would still serve as the hearing officer. They'd still have to decide if it's open or closed. It still has to be an open meeting, it's gotta be posted.
Right.
If it's open, it's open. If it's on a Saturday, most people aren't gonna show up to watch somebody go, for us to go into closed session. But we can go into closed session and keep people out while we do our deliberations and presentation, come back out and say, here's the recommendation going forward to the board. And then with the next board session that comes to the board, we read it into record, you guys make a vote publicly, and we move forward.
So I have a question about that. So what would be the point of saying we're having a committee versus just having a meeting, and if 4 of us could show up, we show up?
There's really no, when I said ad hoc, that means it's just called. So we can say we're having an ad hoc, we can say we're having a special board session for disciplinary reviews, and we can do it that way.
And that way a decision's made that day and it's done. We don't have to bring it back to another meeting.
Yeah, well, that's true. Good point.
Okay, cause I was like confused about what that actually meant, so.
If it's Saturday and we decide on Monday, but I'd hate to have it be Saturday and then be 2 weeks before
Right.
you come back to school, if it's a Wednesday.
Yeah. It just seems like if there's 4 people that make a decision on Saturday, those same 4 people are gonna make a decision on the next board meeting, so feel like we should just be able to make a decision that
Right.
night.
Do we have to have
That day.
18 hours notice, public notice of a special board session?
It has to be properly noticed, signed, and served on all board members.
All right, so properly noticed, signed, and served, so we're gonna do that as opposed to an ad hoc.
I'll turn my phone up, Kimberly.
All
I was
right,
gonna say, I'll make sure you get your letter.
so we'll make sure it's, the timing's right, we'll take a look at it, we could try that, see how that works. I think just doing it outside of the board session.
As long as there's quorum, then.
I think we should try it for all those reasons that we just stated earlier
Yep,
tonight,
alright.
and just see how it goes. If it's not working, then we change it.
So since we're a big district, can we give people the option of where they're gonna have these help and be fine to go to Albion? Is that something we could allow them to elect? There's actually people that are back and forth between both communities. We could allow them to elect
Sure.
Marshall over Albion.
We can make that an option. Good.
And that will probably never have happened again.
Probably not,
So-
probably not.
There would never be a disciplinary hearing.
That's okay.
Is that easy enough for our tech people to do all that too?
We'll work through that. So, one thing I want to mention before we go out is that, this coming Friday is half day, and the following Monday is President's Day for full day for students and teachers. It's half day for students and teachers on Friday. Full day for Monday, all right?
Any other questions on disciplinary hearings? We'll go to public comment, which is done. Board member comments for which no action may be taken at this meeting.
Well, just quickly, you mentioned the athletics booster. It just was a reminder of how giving our community is to our students and stuff. So, I mean, when you go to those events, you really see, you know, the willingness our community has to give back and take care of our kids, you know, for sports or whatever reason. So it's always, I love that event. I think it's a great event, and it's good to see people showing out significant amounts of money, you know, for high school sports or you know, and in that case, it's really a great event. So I think that's a great reminder of what our communities, you know, are willing to do for our kids when we get farther along in some of these other things coming up.
Anybody else? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.